Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm all right. What a nice surprise to hear from you.
I know, and I've even got a nice surprise for you.
I'm listening.
Yes, I want you to marry me.
Oh, Mazel tov.
Thank you. So you can't believe who I'm marrying. But I don't want a wedding. I just want you to marry us. I don't want anybody there.
Okay, so I'm just starting a lecture in 3 minutes. So could you call me back at 2, please?
I'll phone you at 2 and then I'll tell you everything. It's been too long. I haven't seen you.
I
miss you.
I'm excited to hear from you, and I'm excited for your happiness. I look forward to chatting at 2.
Okay, I'll phone you at 2.
Okay, bye. Hello, Dave.
Hello, Rabbi. Welcome back.
Thank you. How are you?
Fine, thanks. How was your trip?
Baruch Hashem. Excellent.
That's nice. You and Rochel well, Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem. Well, just a bit exhausted from 2 nights on a plane.
Yeah.
But but Baruch Hashem, no complaints.
Good. I'm just going to get my
What you gonna get?
my bottle of water and to put the TV softer.
Dokes. Let's see if anybody else pitches. Been away a few weeks. Maybe people made other plans now. You may have a private shoot today.
Looks like it. Is there an extra charge for that?
I guess that's what happens when you go away for a few weeks and people get used to something else.
Yeah, there was, we didn't have anybody last Monday.
Was there anybody during the other weeks?
Yes, the previous week I think there was, but not last Monday. Or I don't remember exactly, but I know that at least one of the 2 weeks of the 2 Mondays, there was no one. Maybe both.
Did anybody send out something that there wouldn't be and that people should go online or what?
Nope.
So I handed over to somebody who I thought was in charge and would do it. Anyway,
No.
I
No
cannot.
problem.
I can't do it when I'm traveling. It's very impractical.
Yeah, yeah.
Time zones and traveling and
Yeah. Yeah, I did look at the text, so to keep up.
I will give it another minute and then we'll start. Okay, let's go.
Good.
Kent Caro apologizes. Okay. Oh, we have someone else. Hello, Paul.
Oh, Rabbi,
Where are you calling in from?
I'm in Cape Town.
Also Cape Town. Okay. Okay, we have apologies from Kent.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Okay, we are, as you can see, on the laws of the fathers of impurity, Avot HaTumah, chapter 13, and let's get moving. Our sages established 5 categories with regard to the ritual purity of clothing. A, or 1, clothes of an unlearned person, one who does not know the halachas, does not know the laws of purity and impurity, and therefore cannot be expected to keep them properly. So we will assume, so normally, if you know what you're doing, you're innocent until proven guilty. But if you're ignorant and you don't know, then in innocent or not such innocent ignorance, you can do all kinds of things unwittingly. Therefore, we have to, you're sort of guilty until proven innocent. Getting some feedback from your apparatus, Paul. Okay, seems to have quieted down now. All right, so therefore, an unlearned person who doesn't know the laws of purity and impurity, his clothing will be considered as a midras. Midras means something which was upon which a zav, someone who was tome from venereal discharge, sat on or laid on, and is a primary source of impurity and imparts impurity to someone else who touches it or carries it. So therefore, we will assume that his clothing is impure. Similarly, the unlearned people themselves are considered as zavim. That means that they are impure with regard to pure substance, as they would render other things impure. But now we're talking about their clothing in particular. 2, the clothes of people who partake of ordinary food in a state of purity. Okay, so let me explain. So people in the olden days, when purity and impurity were regularly kept up, unlike today, where we're all considered impure because the temple is no longer in existence and we cannot purify ourselves. So everybody's basically impure today. But in the olden days, there were people of different levels, and the more pious a person was, the more careful they would be from allowing themselves to become impure. So people who partake of ordinary food in a state of purity, that means they're pretty strict about it, about conducting themselves, keeping themselves pure. So people who partake of ordinary food in a state of purity are considered as a mitzvah for those who partake of the second tithe. Now, the second tithe would be brought to Jerusalem and had to be partaken of there, or you had to transfer it, exchange it for money, and buy food with that money and eat that food in Jerusalem. So it's a higher level of purity required for the second tithe food than for ordinary food. So if you're just careful with ordinary food, when it comes to second tithe food, people who are careful with ordinary food would be considered tome for those who have to deal with a higher level, a higher standard of purity with second tithe food. People who partake of ordinary food in the state of purity themselves, they are called purushim. Purushim means, we would call it, shall we say, those who are set apart, sort of very pious people. These people would avoid contact with ordinary people who were not careful about purity and impurity. So they're called Pharisees elsewhere. It means the pious ones. They are not considered as Zovim, as impure, because we know that they're very careful about it. Even with regard to Truma, a Porish is considered pure, even if he touches Truma with his hand. So Truma is an even higher level of purity than the second tithe. And someone who is a Porish, someone who is a pious one, who keeps a very high standard of purity, even if he touches the food, it's okay if it's the second tithe. It's okay if it's even Truma, which is only able to be eaten by a Kohen in a state of purity, because these people we can trust because they're very careful. 3, clothes of people who partake of the second tithe are considered as mere for those who partake of Truma. So again, Truma is a higher level of Truma. So if you're just careful with the second tithe, it's not good enough for the higher standard of Truma. 4, the clothes of people who partake of Truma are considered as a mitzvah for those who partake of consecrated food. Consecrated food means from the altar and the temple, say meats of the sacrificial offerings, which are certain parts are eaten by the Kohanim and certain parts by the donors of that offering. And that's a higher standard of purity than even teruma, which is just eaten by the Kohanim. So the people who partake of truma themselves are, however, not considered as zovim with regard to consecrated articles, but their clothes would not be good enough for the consecrated article standard of purity. And finally, number 5, the clothes of those who partake of consecrated foods will be considered as a midras, meaning tome, with regard to the offering of the red heifer, the porah aduma. That's the highest level of sanctity and purity. A person who is pure with regard to consecrated foods is not considered as a zov, but his clothing would be considered tome when it came to the red heifer. So those are the 5 levels of purity to do with clothing. Similarly, our sages established different categories with regard to tevilah. Tevilah means ritual immersion in the waters of a mikveh. So there's different levels and different standards, as we'll explain. Someone immersed himself in the mikveh without any intent, meaning he didn't have kavanah, he didn't have in mind that he's now immersing in the ritual waters of the mikveh to purify himself to be on a particular level of purity. He had no intent. He just went into the mikveh. He is pure with regard to ordinary food, but he still may not partake of the second tithe until he has had intent to immerse for the sake of eating the second tithe. If he immersed for the second tithe, that's okay, but he's still forbidden to partake of truma, which is a higher level, unless he had that in mind. If he immersed for truma, he had that in mind, he's okay for truma, but he's forbidden to partake of consecrated foods from the altar, which is a higher level. If he had intent for the consecrated foods, he'll still be forbidden to participate in the offering of the red heifer. So we'll go through these 5 levels again. If he immersed with the intent in the offering of the red heifer, that's the highest level. He had that kavanah, that he had that in mind when he went to the mikveh, then he is pure for everything. Because logically, one who immerses for the sake of a more stringent circumstance will be considered acceptable for a more lenient circumstance. So if he has a mind for the porah aduma, the red heifer, which is the highest standard, then everything else is included because they're all of a lesser standard. That's pretty obvious and logical. If a person immersed without any intent whatsoever, he is pure only with regard to ordinary food and impure for everything higher than that from the second tithe upward. Similarly, if he washes his hands or immerses his hands in the mikveh, you have to have intent. He has to focus in his intention. Even if he desires only to partake of the second tithe. From that tithe and any level of sanctity higher, one must focus. You have to have kavanah, you have to have it in mind. You can't just jump into mikveh like to cool off, like you go into a pool, if the water's cool. Sometimes mikvehs are heated and hot. I used to love a really hot mikveh on a Friday afternoon before Shabbos. It's like going into a steam bath. For ordinary food, however, it's not necessary for him to focus his intent. All of these stringencies are rabbinic. By biblical law, if you immerse, you're pure for everything. The rabbis were more strict and they made these different categories and they required people to have intent for the correct category that they were requiring it for. 3, when a person who was pure with regard to Truma diverted his attention from partaking of it. So let's say he's gone to the mikveh, he's washed his hands, and he's now worthy and able to eat Truma. He's a Kohen. Truma is allowed for the Kohanim. The Truma is pure. He is pure. The problem is that during the meal, his attention gets diverted. Somebody rings the bell, somebody comes in, somebody puts on the 11 o'clock news, whatever it might be, and his attention is diverted. Once your attention is diverted, we're worried that you are no longer going to be careful about where you put your hands, for example. And you might touch something which is tameh because you're losing focus that you're eating something sacred and pure at the moment. So when a person was pure who got the tumah, and then he diverted his attention, the diversion of attention causes him to contract impurity. And he will be forbidden to partake of truma until he immerses himself again. However, he doesn't have to wait until nightfall after he immerses. As soon as he immerses himself, he can carry on eating the truma until he gets distracted again. If his hands were pure for truma, but he diverted his attention from eating, even though he says, I know that my hands did not contract any truma, his hands become impure because of his diversion of attention, because you have a principle, yodayim askonios, hands are busy. Hands are always busy. You know, you touch your nose, you touch your mouth, you wipe your eyebrows. This is how one of the ways that viruses get transmitted, like COVID, because people touch themselves. That's why we have, half the reason we have the masks, and we're always sanitizing our hands. So hands are busy. That's a Talmudic rule. Hands are busy. And a person might not even be aware that he touched something. So therefore, unless you really keep your focus of attention, if you divert your attention, we will assume that your hands have touched something impure in that period. When a person did not guard himself from the impurity associated with a human corpse, okay, that's the highest level of tumah. You touch a corpse. It's called the grandfather, the father of fathers of all impurity. And he wasn't careful. If he's not certain that he did not contract impurity, he must have the ash of the red heifer sprinkled upon him on the 3rd and 7th days after his doubt arose, because of his diversion of attention. He was in proximity of a dead body. He went to a funeral, and he wasn't careful to focus his attention. And maybe he was a pallbearer or something. And then he will become tomei, and he will not be able to eat sacred foods like truma. So he will have to go have the ashes of the red heifer sprinkled on him, because that's how someone became impure from a corpse has to be purified with the ashes of the red heifer. Again, that's rabbinic, because we don't know for a fact that he became Tomei. Similarly, our sages decree that kalim, utensils that are discovered in marketplaces and streets, even in deserts, should be assumed to be Tomei, because they might have contracted impurity from a corpse or a zov, someone who is impure. Similarly, saliva found in such places is considered to have come out of the mouth of someone who was Tomei, and therefore it too will be Tomei, lest, because you're out in a public place, who knows what these utensils came in contact with, and therefore we'll assume that it's Tomei. Similarly, saliva found in such places, in public places, is considered to be from an impure person and will also impart impurity. 5. All of the kalim found in Jerusalem are pure. So Jerusalem is an exception. Why? Because people who go to Jerusalem purify themselves to go to the Holy Temple. So whereas in the public place, even in a desert, we might, and we find utensils, we would assume that it's Tomei. In Jerusalem, it's innocent until proven guilty. We'll assume it's Tahor, because people know to purify themselves when they go to the holy city. Even if these utensils were found on the way going down to a mikveh. So you might think that the person intended to take this utensil to dip it in the mikveh. Even then, we'll assume it's tahor, pure rather than impure. For the sages did not decree concerning kalim found in Jerusalem, with the exception of knives for the slaughter of sacrificial animals, because this is a higher standard. So what does this mean? Knives found in Jerusalem throughout the year can be assumed to be Tomei. However, if you find a knife in Jerusalem on the 14th of Nisan, which is Erev Pesach, when we're shechting the Korban Pesach, there's hundreds or thousands of people who are involved in slaughtering the lambs for their families, which they're going to eat at the Seder tonight on the first night of Pesach. So it's happening on Erev Pesach. Then on such an occasion, we will assume that the guy who asked about the sorry. So if it's on Erev Pesach, one may slaughter sacrificial animals with that knife that you found. We'll assume it's tahor. Even if the 14th Nisan fell on Shabbos, for no decree was made with regard to knives found on that day. Similarly, a knife was found on a yontif, you may use it to shecht immediately. We're talking about the special knives used by a shochet, long, it's called a chalif, special, very sharply honed knife for shchita. For on a yontif, we assume that all kalim are pure. 6, if you found a knife on the 13th of Nisan, Erev Pesach, the day before Erev Pesach, we cannot make the assumption that it's pure, and therefore it will need the ashes of the red heifer, and it should be immersed, and then you can shecht on the following day. Normally you have to wait, but here we allowed you to do it on the next day. The sages considered as if the 13th of Nisan was the 7th day of its purification with the ashes of the red heifer. That was a leniency. 7, if you find a knife tied to a knife whose status he knows. So there's one knife attached to another knife. The one knife, you know the status, it's tahor or it's tameh. And another knife is attached to it and you don't know the status of the second knife. The rabbis say, we will give the second unknown knife the status of the known knife. If the one is pure, this will be pure. If it's impure, it will be impure. And we'll assume that it was attached for that reason, which is, again, a logical assumption. What about saliva? People walk around and they chrake, and they spit, spittoons. And there aren't always spittoons, so people spit all over the place. Our sages decreed that any saliva of unknown origin found in the middle of the road in Jerusalem is impure. Same as saliva of unknown origin found anywhere, because maybe the person who spit out the saliva was tomei, and therefore what comes out of his mouth is tomei. However, saliva found on the side of the road in Jerusalem, not on the road, on the side of the road is pure, because that's where the Perushim, those pious people we spoke about earlier, they walk on the side, not on the street, so that they will not contract impurity by contacting people who are unlearned and are not careful. However, during Yontif time, the reverse is true. Saliva in the middle of the road is pure, because all of Israel can be assumed to have been purified for the Yontif. Saliva on the side of the road will be impure, because the few individuals who are impure will move off to the side. 9. Just like a primary derivative of impurity, meaning a sheni, right? Rishon. Rishon is a primary derivative of a avhatuma, of the primary source of tumah. So a rishon will be able to, if it touches something else, that will become a sheni, and the sheni touches something else, that'll become a shlishi. So you have different levels of tumah. One touches the next, and they're all becoming tomei. When there is an unresolved doubt whether an entity is a primary derivative or not, it will create a secondary derivative of doubtful status, and likewise a third. So it's a doubt. If it's a doubt, we don't know, and we have to be careful just in case. 10, when there is a question whether truma or other consecrated food, which is on a sacred level higher than ordinary food, there's a question, there's a doubt whether it became impure, it should be burnt because of this impurity. That's what happens to food that, holy food that becomes impure has to be burnt. A, to make sure no one eats it, and B, to treat it sort of more, it's considered more respectful to burn it than to just let it lay around there, where it could also cause other impurity. 11, there are situations where there is a question about a food status for which the ruling is held in abeyance. We don't know, and we don't have a way of finding out. So it's in abeyance, neither here nor there. They may not be eaten, nor may you burn them. So you just have to leave it around till it goes off. And there are other questionable situations that warrant the burning of truma, and these say consecrated foods. If, however, there is a compounded doubt, meaning a double doubt, a doubt of a doubt, I'll explain. Concerning the impurity of truma, or for sure consecrated food, they should not be burnt. Instead, the ruling concerning them is held in abeyance. It should not be eaten, nor should it be burnt. A doubt of a doubt, meaning a double doubt. So we'll soon give an example of a double doubt. The next one, you'll soon see. 13, there are 6 doubtful situations for which truma is burnt. All rabbinic decrees. A beit hapras. Beit hapras is a piece of land where a dead body was buried, but we don't know exactly where it is. So there might be bits and pieces of this body all over. So land that comes from such a piece of earth that comes from such a piece of land is of doubtful purity. B, earth from the diaspora. The diaspora is considered, because diaspora is is basically run not by Jewish law, but by other nations, and they are not careful about these things. So it's again guilty till proven innocent. It is assumed to be impure. The clothes of unlearned people, which we mentioned earlier, they're not careful because they don't know the laws. 4, utensils, kalim, that are discovered in the street. E, saliva of unknown origin. F, the urine of an impure person that became mixed with an equal amount of urine from an animal, and it's not known whether the appearance of the mixture was that of a person's urine or whether that appearance was nullified or whether that appearance was not nullified. I think this is a mistake. So if there was more animal urine than human urine, it would be okay, I think, but we don't know. So these are all doubtful situations. Now, bearing that in mind, if Truma contracted impurity due to contact with one of these entities which are doubtful, even though the fundamental dimension of their impurity is doubtful, the Truma should still be burned because Truma is holy and we don't want to take chances with things that are sacred. The rationale is that we're one certain that any of these impurities were present, the impurity would be scriptural in nature, would be biblical, for a corpse and a zov are scriptural sources of impurity, and Truma is sacred. Whether Truma touched one of these 6 entities or contracted impurity to one of these entities, and thus it is a tertiary derivative from them, the Truma should be burnt. But if there's a doubt, if however there's a question of whether or not the entity touched the base hapras, or the earth of the nations, or the garments, or the saliva, or the kalim, or that doubtful urine, then we have a doubt of a doubt. A, we don't know if it touched it, and B, we don't know for sure that these entities are tome. It was a stringency that we took in case they might be tome. So in such a case when we're not sure and there's a doubt of a doubt, what's the rule? The truma will not be burned. It will be held in abeyance, meaning we may not eat it and we may not burn it. We just have to leave it alone. The rationale being, A, the fundamental dimension of their impurity is doubtful. Perhaps it is impure, perhaps it is impure. And B, even if you say that it is impure, it's possible that there was contact with the truma, but it's possible there was no contact because we don't know. So these are 2 doubts. Thus, 2 unresolved questions, 2 doubts are involved. And when there are 2 doubts, truma is not burned, but neither can we eat it. So it is held in abeyance as explained. A quick quiz, and then we'll let you go back to whatever you have to do. Question number 1. Are people who partake of truma considered as zavim with regard to consecrated articles to impart impurity to them?
That's the first part.
Okay.
No.
No. Which of either is incorrect?
We can't see the answers, Rabbi.
Which of the following statements is incorrect? The clothes of people who partake of a second time considered as truma. I say number 3 is incorrect.
Yes, yes.
True or false? If one immersed for the second tithe, he may partake of truma. I say it's false. You have to immerse for what you're going to be partaking of. Finally, if you're unsure whether truma touches base, what is the law? We just had that now, and we said it be held in abeyance. Thank you very much, guys.
Number 3. Thank you, Rabbi.